your introduction. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you for your hospitality. The Polish Institute of Arts and Sciences has greatly honoured me. My wife and I have been quite overwhelmed by the extraordinary warmth which we have been received. Your Excellency, Pani Prezydent, Szanowni Państwo, Mesdames et Messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. On the 3rd of May, the Sejm, or Parliament of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, acclaimed the law on government, thereafter known as the Constitution of the 3rd of May. The Polish Sejm had been deliberating since October 1788. After it adjourned at the end of May 1792, it will be known initially as the Revolutionary Sejm, but later either as the 4-year Sejm or the Great Sejm. I call it the Polish Revolution, partly because the term was in frequent use at the time, in at least 5 languages, and partly because the changes effected by the 4-year Sejm were both sufficiently significant and sufficiently swift as to merit the name of revolution. The Commonwealth of the two nations, often referred to simply as Poland, was formed at Lublin in 1569, and the map shows the borders at that time. The Commonwealth was under attack from Muscovy. Representatives of the Kingdom or Crown of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which had hitherto been linked by a common dynasty, agreed to share a common parliament and a common elective monarch. The Commonwealth's political system was based on consensus. Compromises were thrashed out between competing interests and ideas. The confessional and social diversity of this huge state, whose area exceeded 1 million square kilometres in the early 17th century, made the achievement of such consensus essential. A political culture steeped in the ideals of the ancient Roman Republic, as rediscovered during the Renaissance, helped more often than not to achieve the necessary consensus. Until the middle of the 17th century, the Commonwealth fought off its enemies, and despite the monopoly of political and many civil rights held by its numerous nobility, its diverse peoples generally prospered. You hear me at the back. Thereafter, afflicted by decades of devastating warfare, the Commonwealth sickened. Its political system seized up. By about 1720, Poland had become a Russian sphere of influence. The Commonwealth's domestic politics were characterized by both Poles and foreigners as a state of anarchy. A frown from the Russian ambassador was enough to stifle any initiative for reform. For about half a century, St. Petersburg was content simply to prevent reform in the Commonwealth, but the 1760s brought an intensification of Russian interference. The convulsions produced by Catherine II's more interventionist policies produced the first partition of 1772. And the reimposition on the amputated Commonwealth of still stricter Russian supervision. Within the tight limits of this framework, King Stanisław August Poniatowski sought incremental social, economic, fiscal, cultural, educational, judicial, military, and political improvements. Catherine II, who had placed her former lover on the Polish throne in 1764 because she had mistakenly believed that he would be a pliable instrument of her policies, had good reason to suspect that he was working to strengthen and reform the Commonwealth a goal which she believed was fundamentally contrary to Russian imperial interests. In the autumn of 1788, with Russia preoccupied by war with the Ottoman Empire, the king lost control. The same repudiated the Russian guarantee of the Commonwealth's form of government, declared that Poland's army would increase from 18,000 to 100,000 in strength, and embraced what it believed to be the sincere friendship of the King of Prussia. Having completed this geopolitical revolution, the Sejm began to transform the Commonwealth. The results of the Polish Revolution included far-reaching reform to central and local government, taxation, urban communities, the Catholic Church of both rites, Latin and Ruthenian, the situation of other religions, the judicial system, education, and the army. The conduct of politics was also revolutionized. The influence of foreign, royal, and aristocratic patrons was greatly diminished. Vigorous discussions and polemics took place on a wide range of political, social, confessional, and constitutional questions. For the first time in over a century, members of the Sejm, and also those thousands of nobles and burghers who participated in the reformed organs of local and municipal government, had the opportunity not only to declaim and to posture, but to take responsibility for the Commonwealth. The Constitution of the 3rd of May 1791 was not so much the culmination of the Sejm's reforms as an outline for the still further reaching changes that were agreed and began to be implemented in the 13 months that followed. In the summer of 1792, a Russian-sponsored counter-revolution overthrew the work of the Polish Revolution, including the Constitution of the 3rd of May. That counter-revolution is usually referred to after the town in which the Crown Confederacy was supposedly formed, Targowica. It was in fact formed in St. Petersburg. The second partition of the Commonwealth followed in 1793, provoking the insurrection led by Tadeusz Kościuszko in 1794. The suppression of the insurrection led to the third partition of 1795, which divided the remnants of the Commonwealth between Russia, Prussia, and Austria. An independent Polish state would only be restored in 1918, only to be extinguished once more in 1939. A further half-century elapsed before the country emerged from Soviet domination. Since the bicentennial year of 1991, I have often spent May the 3rd in Poland. What has this anniversary meant to Poles in the last 2 decades? For many, perhaps most Polish citizens, the 3rd of May is part of the Majówka. This is, in effect, an extended spring break, often enjoyed in glorious weather, created by the restoration of the traditional holiday of the 3rd of May without abolishing the holiday of the 1st of May, introduced by the communist regime. Taking 3 days off work can often yield a 9-day break. In recent years, holidays abroad have become very popular at this time. Most Poles do not attend official ceremonies to mark the 3rd of May, or, unless the holiday falls on a Sunday, go to church in order to give thanks to God for granting a favourable moment for the rescue of Poland from foreign violence and domestic discord. This enjoyment is taken from the Declaration of the Assembled Estates, which, like the Constitution, was accepted unanimously on 5th of May 1791 in order to regularise the extraordinary acclamation of the law on government 2 days previously. Among politically committed Poles, however, there remains some symbolic opposition between the red holiday of the 1st of May and the national and Catholic holiday of the 3rd of May. In the interwar period, 3rd of May was favoured by the National Democrats as an alternative to the 11th of November, celebrated as Independence Day by the supporters of Józef Piłsudski. In emigration, the admirers of the two principal pre-war traditions came together to favour both the 11th of November and the 3rd of May. Now, with these caveats, the Constitution of the 3rd of May has usually been celebrated, ever since its extraordinary acclamation, as a statement of the Polish nation's desire to be independent. It has been interpreted as a gesture of defiance towards the three powers that partitioned the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Poles have been more inclined to mark their predecessors' efforts to free their nation from foreign violence than to cure its domestic disorder. Let me now quote from the glorious preamble to the Constitution in the English translation made by the Poland's envoy to Great Britain, Franciszek Bogaty. Persuaded that our common fate depends entirely upon the establishing and rendering perfect a national constitution, convinced by a long train of experience of many defects in our government, and willing to profit by the present circumstances of Europe and by the favourable moment which has restored us to ourselves, free from the disgraceful shackles of foreign violence, that's a mistake on the screen, prizing more than life and every personal consideration, the political existence, external independence, and internal liberty of the nation, whose care is entrusted to us, desirous, moreover, to deserve the blessing and gratitude not only of our contemporaries, but also of future generations, for the sake of the public good, for securing our liberty and maintaining our kingdom and our possessions, in order to exert our natural rights with zeal and firmness, we do solemnly establish the present Constitution. In a critical conjuncture of European history, only the immediate acceptance of the Constitution, or so it was put, could save Polish independence, liberty, and even the very existence of the nation. The achievement of necessary unity among the Polish nation was often presented as a miracle of divine providence. I shall confine myself to one such quotation, which is all the more notable as coming from someone subsequently regarded, and with good reason, as an anti-clerical. On the 15th of March 1792, Stanisław Potocki told the same. When I cast my eye over the elapsed ages of the history of the world, I can see nothing more splendid, nothing more worthy of human memory, than the unity of the Polish nation, which shall serve free nations as an example. In vain did the voice of jealousy, the voice of slander, accuse the Poles of disunity. It, that is unity, was with the salvation of the fatherland. Our quarrels were the result of misunderstanding, but in a single moment, Poland changed her form and showed herself in harmony. This I judge to be the greatest miracle of Providence, the most splendid monument of Your Majesty's reign. Potocki's purpose was to persuade the Sejm to approve the ceremonial celebrations planned for the first anniversary of the 3rd of May. Parliament agreed unanimously. The celebrations on the 3rd of May 1792 culminated in the laying of the foundation stone of the Church of Divine Providence, next to the King's summer residence of Łazienki, just outside Warsaw. The Russian invasion that began 11 days later ensured that it was never completed. These are the surviving reproductions of the plans. The others were lost during the Second World War. A much larger church dedicated to divine providence a few kilometres further south was begun in the late 1990s, its construction continues. In proclamations and pastoral letters, sermons and speeches, ceremonies and celebrations right across the Commonwealth, in cathedrals and parish churches, schools and universities, town halls and military camps, even in synagogues and synods. This was the message that the Commonwealth and the very existence of the Polish nation itself had been providentially delivered from the abyss through national unity. Only the maintenance of that unity could keep Poland alive and free. The multiplicity of motifs in pro-constitutional discourse is apparent from this commemorative medal. The reverse, which we see here, features a genius with broken fetters at his feet, olive branch in one hand, and in the other holding a Fedrian cap, a French revolutionary symbol of liberty, over a globe with the arms of the Commonwealth and the King, topped by the monogram of Christ. To the left is a fasces, ancient Roman symbol of unity in strength, and radiating light from above is the all-seeing triangular eye of divine providence. The upper inscription in Latin reads "free from terror," probably a reference to foreign violence, but perhaps also of domestic disorder, while that below translates as "by the laudable decree of the same on the 3rd of May 1791. In sum, we have symbols both of religion and of liberty, in providential harmony, all secured by national unity. Now, these broken fetters recall one of those resonant phrases in the Constitution's preamble: free from the disgraceful shackles of foreign violence. The Commonwealth had been so shackled for much of the 18th century, and would be again between 1944 and 1989. The celebration of the Constitution as an expression of the sovereign Polish national will began even before the first anniversary of the 3rd of May 1792, and the symbolic power of the anniversary has ever since either catalysed opposition to an occupied or to a satellite regime, or, between 1919 and 1939, and since 1990, served as a reminder of the sacrifices made for national independence. For the last century or so, the fact that the law on government of the 3rd of May 1791 was the second recognisably modern written constitution in the world, after the American but before the French, has often been emphasised. It is a source of national pride. This seniority, however, has only rarely prompted an analysis of the content of the Constitution for the benefit of the wider public. In contrast, the scholarly analysis of those contents and their context has, for many decades, been both thorough and perceptive. Most importantly, the process by which the document was drafted, negotiated, and edited was reconstructed by the late Emanuel Mateusz Rozporowski. I'd like to draw your attention to two reflections by that great historian. The first is counterfactual. According to Rozporowski, the renewal of Polish parliamentarism, in partnership with a stronger monarchy, and the creation of reformable institutions, accomplished by the 4 years' set, brought the Commonwealth into the ranks of those European states, notably Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and especially Great Britain, whose chief political and social problem in the 19th and early 20th century became the movement towards universal suffrage. Had the system of government initiated by the Constitution survived and evolved, he argued, the Commonwealth would have remained among those states. Rozporowski's other reflection concerns the Commonwealth's two legacies to the 19th century. One was the Constitution of the 3rd of May 1791, associated with limited monarchy, evolutionary change, and parliamentary politics, and looking for its inspiration towards Great Britain. The other was the Kosciuszko insurrection of 1794, associated with the armed struggle for national independence and with revolutionary methods to mobilize the strength of the entire nation, burghers, peasants, Jews, and Tatars included, taking its cue from revolutionary France. Although the former legacy was claimed by influential figures such as the Anglophile Prince Adam Jerzy Czartoryski, it was the latter that ultimately captured the Polish national imagination, and especially in the first half of the 20th century, retrospectively to characterize the 19th century as a century of romantic republican insurrection. It is not my intention this evening to challenge Wykładowski, but to enlarge on the points that he made. The thesis that I shall advance is that the Constitution of the 3rd of May 1791 had the potential to found a balanced system of government and a political culture based on orderly liberty, rządna wolność, had it been allowed to put down roots. That potential arose from a felicitous blending of republican and monarchical political ideas during the course of the drafting of the law on government. Both the republican and the monarchist contributions were steeped not only in the rhetoric, but also in many of the values of the European and North American Enlightenment: liberty, toleration, improvement, and critical reason. Both the republican and the monarchist elements were also contained within a settlement that extended the degree of toleration according to other religions, but nevertheless underlined the leading role of Roman Catholicism as the dominant national religion, to quote Article 1. Let us start with the Republican contribution. Over the course of the 18th century, Polish political thought and discourse gradually moved away from the Aristotelian idea of a mixed form of government, embodied in the composition of the 3 estates of the same, shown in this 17th century illustration. That is, the king, the senatorial estate, and the knightly estate, or the chamber of envoys. It moved towards a purer republican concept of the state. Traditionally, the aristocratic Senate mediated between the monarchic and the democratic elements in the Commonwealth, or, as it was usually put, between majesty and liberty, keeping both in check. This model came to be regarded as a cause of permanent conflict rather than harmony. The monarch would inevitably seek to extend his dominion at the expense of liberty, while the magnates who dominated the Senate often blatantly abused their influence over their fellow nobles, insulting the cherished value of equality among citizens. Increasingly, political thinkers came to see the solution to the paralysis of the Commonwealth's institutions in a far-reaching reduction of the powers of both the monarch and the Senate, and the vesting of sovereignty in the noble nation itself, whether gathered via its envoys in the lower chamber of the Sejm, or in person at its local assemblies, the Sejmics. Towards the end of the 18th century, some radical thinkers, under the influence of Enlightenment ideas of natural rights, but also returning to Andrzej Fritz-Modrzewski and other 16th century authors, urged a reconfiguration of the Polish nation in both social and in confessional terms. Their idea of the Polish nation would include all inhabitants of the Commonwealth. With the monarch deprived of his corrupting powers of patronage, it will be possible to address the problem that by the mid-18th century prevented the Sejm from taking any decisions at all: the liberal veto. Many authors criticised its abuses or considered ways to limit its scope, but only the piarist Stanisław Konarski made an unequivocal case for simple majority voting. Some writers began to consider ways of reforming royal elections to avoid the danger and disorder they invariably involved, and a few began to contemplate the introduction of hereditary succession to the throne once the monarch had been successfully emasculated. The idea of political virtue remained at the heart of Polish Republican discourse. The Piarist and Jesuit school reforms of the mid-18th century did much to infuse members of the 4 Years' Sejm with a renewed rhetoric of patriotic sacrifice for common good. Nevertheless, gradually the conviction that all of the Commonwealth's ills were the result only of a slippage from ancestral virtues, and that consequently moral reformation would suffice to cure her. That came to seem inadequate. Konarski did most to convince his compatriots that the reform of failing institutions was the prerequisite for a wider moral